Well, thanks for joining us. Today we're here to talk about CICS and security. So I hope you can see my screen. And I've got a few introductory slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to our presenter today. So we're here for the virtual user group for CICS. And I want to thank first our partners from Broadcom and Data Kinetics for their support of this series and these programs. Check them out if you have time. I want to do a plug for this month at Planet Mainframe. You may have noticed that we have started dropping the influential mainframers of 2025. So all month long, we're recognizing people that have made a contribution to our mainframe community. This is my favorite program we've ever run because getting to hear about all the people that are shaping mainframe and more importantly, inspiring others. It's just the best program to work on. So you can check that out at Planet Mainframe or on LinkedIn, where we'll be posting a couple every day this month. After today's session, we have a 2-question survey. Basically, how'd you enjoy it and what topics would you like to see next? So on your way out, you can just click and fill out that survey. Today, we're here to, as I said, talk about CICS and security, and we have Leanne Wilson here. I'm going to stop my share, Leanne, so you can start yours while I introduce you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, so Leanne is a senior technical delivery manager and senior security consultant. She's got 13 years experience in mainframe systems engineering and cybersecurity. She leads the mainframe technical delivery of security and infrastructure projects. She's CICS certified, and I think we've got a really good session today, and I think very timely. So with that, Leanne, let me turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. You see my screen okay?
I don't see it yet.
Huh.
There may be one more button to press.
Says you are screen sharing.
Does anyone else see it?
Maybe we can see a screen. We can see a screen.
Thank you, Leanne. It's there.
Your internet, Amanda, has really let you down. Bless you.
I know. I'm embarrassed to be a part of a tech group with such bad internet.
You can just sit back and relax now.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for talking with us today.
No problem. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to talk to you for about the next, let's see how long it takes. 45 minutes, 60 minutes, who knows? First time I've done this presentation. So let's give it a whirl. So CICS Security, the basics. What we'll do is I'll have a really brief introduction. You're not here to hear about me. We'll go through some objectives for the session, and then we'll get straight into the CICS Security, and then we'll summarize and do a Q&A if we've got time at the end. If we run out of time, if anyone wants to drop me an email with any questions, that's also fine. I can give my contact details out. That's cool with me. So Leanne Wilson, that's me. As Amanda said, I'm a senior security consultant and technical delivery manager for a company called Vertali in the UK. Basically what that means is I get to do less technical work than I used to, and I get to watch other people do technical work that I want to do, essentially. I've worked on mainframes now for 14 years, as of February. I work mostly in security, RACF, top secret predominantly, sort of security improvement programs, implementing different security methodologies, policy reviews, audits, pen testing, and do a lot of work in the conversion space as well with ESMs that are, we can go either way with those. I'm not a CICS systems programmer. I'm not a CICS admin. I just know a few things about the security of CICS, and I've had to pick it up through various projects. So CICS as an overall thing, you guys will probably know so much more than me. that little picture there is just something, I think a picture sometimes can sum up 1,000 words. My auntie sent me that in a WhatsApp chat once, which I think is very fitting. In my spare time, I've got 2 dogs. I've got a strange hobby of something called High Rocks fitness races. I like to walk, I like wine, I like cheese, which is why I have to do fitness races, essentially, because of those. Can we call them hobbies or should we call them habits? Either or. So, objectives for this session. We're going to learn the key security components of CICS. We'll have a look at authentication, how we authenticate into CICS, the authorization that can be done, and at the end, I'm just going to have a look at some ways that you could possibly go off and do some auditing on your own CICS configuration. And where possible, I'll identify some best practices for securing CICS environments. Okay, this is a short session. It will delve into CICS security. It's a huge topic and it can get really complex depending on the configuration that you're doing. However, hopefully this will just give you enough information to understand your own CICS implementation from a security perspective, and give you some pointers on maybe where to look and how to look at it. So what is CICS? Customer Information Control System, CICS, okay? What you typically see is a CICS application at the front end with some kind of database at the back end. Might be DB2, maybe IMS, hey, it might even be a vSAN data set, anything that sits behind it. Might not even sit on the mainframe these days, okay? It's specialist infrastructure. Basically, it's multi-threaded application environment. So you can have multiple transactions, multiple programs, all running concurrently at the same time. Just to set out the language for the start of the presentation, because I think I always hear this and I'm like, oh, what's going on? Are these different things? So essentially, you have a CICS system, CICS started task, CICS region. Okay, you have a task running on the system. It can either be a batch job, it can be a started task, much predominantly more of that latter one. And it's either a CICS subsystem or CICS region. They're all interchangeable language, I believe. And you can have the majority, I believe, is people who've come across CICS as a started task, and you can have multiple of those CICS regions running. Okay, but those terms are kind of used interchangeably. And then also you've got this sort of CICSplex, which is the clustered version of the above, which in essence, underneath that sort of is something called MRO, multi-region operation, which is these clustered together. Or you can have those single instances of CICS. Okay, the benefits of a CICSplex, failover, resiliency, and it allows CICS regions within the same MVS image or sysplex to communicate, share resources, enabling sort of like distributed transaction processing around those different regions, function shipping, and sort of like intercommunication facilities. As I said, CICS provides an interface to other systems, DB2, IMS, IDMS, etc., as backends. First commercial release was July 8th, 1969. Okay, so small CICS overview there, small RACF overview here. So what is RACF? Okay, so essentially RACF stands for Resource Access Control Facility. And that is the facility to control access to your resources. So with that in mind, RACF is a resource access-based model, which means that you provide the security on those resources. And we'll come in to talk about what those resources are in a CICS environment. RACF allows you to identify and authenticate users. authorize users to access protected resources, the resources that we're protecting, be that data, be that transactions, be that the ability to do stuff, like, you know, issue a command, execute a program, that sort of thing. RACF also gives us the ability to log and report attempted unauthorized access, and it's also the control means of access to those resources. So, basic RACF example. So, okay, we've got a group, CICS ADM, the CICS system administrators who should have access to run CEMT transaction. Okay, in CICS terms, CEMT is a named resource. In this case, it's that transaction. And as I've just said, RACF is a resource access-based model. So we provide access on those resources. So in this case, on that transaction. Okay. So what we would need to do is we would need to make sure that there's a profile covering that. And we do that with this sort of like rdefine. So we rdefine the transaction within the RACF class tkickstran, and then we do the permission to it. Okay, so I want that group here, CICS Adam, to have read access to this transaction. Okay. Is it that simple? Absolutely not. Okay, that's just a real basic RACF example, and that's looking at it from that RACF perspective. Okay, there's so much more to it that we need to look at in terms for CICS security. You need to have a real holistic view around the CICS configuration, because that can be very dependent on what profiles come in play, what classes come into play. And also what you are protecting. Okay, so what security checks are being made. Okay, so it's not that simple. It's a fairly complex, if you have a fairly complex setup as well. So CICS security. So there's a number of things that you need to consider from a security perspective when you look at CICS infrastructure. And one of the key things you need to look at is a data set called the CSD, which stands for CICS System Definition. It's a vSAN data set where lots of information is held about how CICS is configured, and also the relationship between transaction and the program. So access to this file and the transactions and batch utilities that manipulate that and the list of its contents need to be strictly controlled. Okay. Very useful thing to look at from an audit perspective. I'd be looking for who's got access to it, how is it backed up, how would you recover from it, what sort of logging is in place around it. Okay, so understanding how they're secured and who's got access to it is really important. Okay. CICS provides transactions to manipulate data that's actually in the CSD. Two transactions, CEDA and CEDB for updating, and then for viewing is CEDC. Okay, there's, as it says on the slides, there's also a batch program, DFHSCDUP. So that's another thing that's important from an audit perspective, to impress onto people, is the protection over that as a program, and then also protection over those transactions, specifically for updating the CSD. Okay. Next thing to consider from a security perspective with CICS is something called the SIT. Okay, it stands for the System Initialization Table, and it defines the configuration for that particular CICS region. The interesting thing about it is that it governs the security interface, and what I mean by that, the elements of security that are enabled, if they are enabled. Okay, so it's a really good place to go and see actually how the configuration for security is set up is the SIT. Okay, so the way the SIT works, it's got a number of inbuilt defaults. You can have a module that's created from the DFH SIT macros, and you create a load module. You can pass the CICS tasks and parameters via sysint DD statements, or you can pass parameters on the exec pugum equals part of the JCL. And you can issue some console commands issuing modify CICS commands. However, you can't change the security definitions dynamically. So if you want to enable something, you've got to stop the subsystem and then restart it after making your change. So if you want to turn something off, or I suppose respectively on, you've got to stop the CICS subsystem, make your change, and then restart it. When CICS is looking for these parameters, it works its way down that list and it finds the one it will use. Essentially to build the SIT table that it's going to be referencing for that region and the security decisions on what's enabled, what's not enabled, etc. So we have a look at like a very simple-ish SIT. You've got a whole bunch of parameters and sort of then some settings around it. Some of the interesting ones are the Apple ID equals, as we've got here. We've got VRT CICS, so that's the VTAM application that the users would log on to, which then can respectfully be protected within the RACF Apple class. So you can set a profile up in the RACF Apple class, APPL, called VRT CICS. You could give that a UAC of none, and you could give that an access list, and that's a really good sort of first checking point to see who can actually log on to that application there. We specify what the default CICS user is. If it's in this case, it's set to CICS user, and then we've got a whole bunch of other security information that we'll go into. So you've got sec equals yes, got sec prefix equals no, x command yes, xtran equals yes, and various other pieces in the SIT. As we go through this presentation, I'll pick these out and we'll expand on them to look at them and what they do. It's typically the job of the CICS systems programmer to maintain these. I believe it's advocated by some that these SIT parameters should be put in a library away from those that are controlled by the CICS systems programmer. As these are the security settings, should these be maintained via change control and then security personnel? Because essentially, if you've got the ability to change these parameters, you've got the ability to change the security controls within that CICS subsystem the next time it started. Okay, so again, this is a really interesting place to just see how it's protected, who's got access to it, what policies and processes do you have around it in terms of changes made to it, and who does that change. So something to think about there, because effectively this is the blueprint for that security that you will have within that CICS region. Okay, so what the ESM does for us. So CICS relies on an ESM, External Security Manager. We are specifically talking about RACF in this instance, but there is ACF2 and Top Secret also. The ESM controls who can log on to CICS, okay, who can execute a transaction, and then who can use a transaction resource, possibly if all of this stuff is enabled at the back end of that transaction. So programs, files, journals, queues, etc. And then also who can execute a CICS command. Okay, so that the RACF can provide protections in those places for CICS. Okay. CICS security is quite a complex piece. When configured, it will call the ESM. What I want to underline there is the word when, because you can turn off security in particular CICS subsystems, and we'll have a look at that later. As I mentioned, that the ESM can be RACF, ACF2, or top secret. CICS used to have a mechanism for internal security, not anymore. So essentially, if you don't use an ESM, you don't have essentially the calls to the ESM configured within CICS, you have no security at all. Okay, so how does that work? So essentially, CICS is going to be asking RACF a whole heap of questions. Okay, it uses a piece of code called rackroot, and it might say rackroot equals request equals auth. Auth is typically essentially do we have access? Okay, so we'll go off to the RACF database, the data spaces, we'll go for any exits if they're in play. And essentially what CICS is going to return back is a return code. And the simple return codes to think about here are 0, 8, and 4. Okay, return code 0, the question that you've asked me, the answer is yes to that request equals auth. So yes, you've got access, proceed. Return code 8, wrong. Access denied. And then return code 4, essentially, I'm not sure. RACF is not sure. So it's then up to the caller in this case, which is CICS, on what you do with that. Do you flip that into an 8? Do you flip that into a 4? Do you do something else? Okay. The thing that you've got to remember here is that it's CICS that's asking RACF the questions, okay? And you can control with the SIP parameters that you have defined what questions will get asked, okay? And essentially by turning off possibly different layers of security and different checks, and we'll get onto that later. Okay. Role of CICS in security control. What we typically use RACF for is sign-on and access authorization. But the thing that I'm trying to say is that access is CICS in this case. It's not RACF. Access denied is CICS. All RACF does is gives CICS the answer to the question. Okay, the CICS code has to turn around and say, oh, I had a return code 8, therefore this is what's going to happen. Leanne doesn't have access to this transaction, therefore I'm not going to allow her to use it. Okay, so you can't, when you're looking at CICS security, if you're doing a CICS audit, if you're just doing a review of your CICS setup, you can't just look at the ESM and have a think about, you know, what profiles are in play, what UACs are in play, what audit set up. Okay, you have to take a step back and look at this quite holistically to see how it's configured and set up in CICS. If not, you could be missing quite a big security hole if you just solely focus on the ESM. Okay, so you have to have a look at how CICS is configured. You have to have a look at those SIP palms. And then have a look at what you've got defined in RACF and your ESM, and then tie it together, see what calls are being made. What does that then relate to in terms of a RACF CICS class, a RACF profile that's defined in that class, okay, the access lists around it, the UACs on it, the auditing, those kind of things. But to determine the questions that CICS is asking, you've first got to go and have a look at that configuration and kind of draw that picture out. Okay. So the SIP, as I mentioned, is where all of that good stuff can take place. Okay, and that's what we'll be looking at. That's where we see the most of those controls, and it's really important for us to understand. There can be lots of those parameters. We won't be going through all of them today. There is lots of good reference material out there. You've got the CIS benchmarks for CICS in a mainframe environment. You've got the CICS security guide, but an understanding of where to go and where to look as a good starting point, and this is one of them. Okay, going to have a look at the SIP parameters, understand the controls around it, and the process that are in place on amendments to it. Okay. We've even seen sort of, can you wrap any environments control access to the SIT? Put it under some sort of change control in terms of like an ISPW, an Endeavour, a change man, or anything that you've got in-house written to provide some kind of change management to that SIT, okay? Because it is a powerhouse of security for the CICS regions that it references. Okay, so here's a stripped down SIT. So as I said, we've got the Apple ID VRT CICS up there. We've got some good morning text that says, there's the Vertali CICS system, and we've got a few things turned on and a few things turned off. Okay. Hopefully you've spotted one that is quite alarming, and it's the sec equals no. So if your SIT palm says sec equals no, there is no security checking is performed within that CICS environment. Okay. Anybody can use any transaction, anybody can use any program, and anyone can access any of those files that that CICS region has access to if they can write the code to do it. Okay. So yeah, as we said there, sec equals no. No ESM is being used, no ESM is being called, no ESM is being asked those questions. Okay. Whereas sec equals yes, is yes, the ESM is being used. Okay. Most of the parameters in the SIT that we're interested in start with X something, Xtran, XTST, XPCT, Xcommand. And there's normally there's either they're on or off, yes or no. Or you can put a different value in. Okay, so with Xtran equals yes, I want to do transaction security using the IBM supplied RACF class definitions. We're going to talk about Xtran a lot more later on. And you can say Xtran equals no transaction security, or you can say Xtran equals and then part of a RACF class name, which will then go and point to a RACF class that will be used. The profiles within that class are then used for those access decisions. Okay. I'll come back to why I said part of it in a second. I've got a better chart. Some of them are just, as I said, so X command equals yes or X command equals no. Are we using command security, yes or no? So you really need to go and have a look in the manual to see what the options are there. But yeah, there's some good ones to look at. Oh, as I just said. Okay, as I just said, the majority of the SIT parameters follow the form of no, yes, or something else. Okay, in this example here, a class name. Okay, so no option is disabled. Yes, option is enabled. That security option is enabled, and then we'll talk more about on the class name shortly. Okay, so what controls do we have in place to protect that data? Okay, so we just saw Xtran. So recommendation is always to configure CICS regions to use transaction security. Okay, with Xtran equals yes. Transaction security in effect is a form of boundary checking. Okay, so there's a lot of conversation around the moment of sort of very much a zero trust strategy. It's not deemed that transaction security would form part of a zero trust strategy on its own unless additional controls were applied on what the transactions actually use after they are being initiated. Okay, on those resources that transaction use. Okay, so as a boundary check, Xtran equals yes is for the transaction security. After that, you've got resource security, ResSec. So as I said, because transaction security is not sufficient, is deemed not sufficient for a zero trust strategy on its own because it's believed to be on a boundary line. It's recommended that you use resource security protect data that is accessed by an application as an additional layer of security. Okay, so enable resource security for all classes of resources that you need to protect in a region. You can specify the SIP parameter res_sec equals always to override any transaction definitions with res_sec no. However, this would be something that you would need to look at. It may not be generally recommended to do such something as heavy hammered as that, perhaps, due to large overheads that could be incurred for every resource that is checked at the back of a transaction. However, it all depends. Security is a balancing act between the CIA model. So you would need to take that away and have a think about that. Documentation sort of states it isn't generally recommended, but it is a balancing act, and it's up to you and what's right within your organization. Okay, specifying res_sec, excuse me, in the definition of a transaction, together with the appropriate resource classes defined in the SIP parameters, okay, and having a look and see where that additional layer of security is required, would maybe be a recommendation there to do it at that level and ensure you're turning on what you need to, rather than heavy hammering it completely, because there may be some very simple transactions that don't really require that additional layer. So it's about doing a review on that. So yeah, specifying res_sec, yes, in the definition of a transaction, together with appropriate resource classes defined in that SIT, can introduce another layer of security checking in addition to just that transaction attached security, which is the XTran. Okay, and then we've got command security. So the system programming interface, the SPI commands, they can be used to manage the CICS system and its resources. If people had access to this, a rogue user, or if you know, that they can be used to cause significant damage. So it's recommended that you use command security to control who is allowed to issue the commands. Most applications don't need to issue SPI commands. And again, a note, although you can disable command security by specifying command sec no attribute in the transaction definitions, you then can do an override in the SIT of command sec equals or always to override that. Again, that's something to have a look at. Have a look what you've got set up. You got command sec equals no, have you got it? Yes, how have you got it on your transaction? And take that holistic view of, see, what is the need there for you? Okay. Remember, if people can issue these commands, it does put a risk into what people can do against those CICS regions with those SPI commands. Okay, so they would be a couple of places that I'd go away and have a look, see how they are set up, how are they defined, have a look at the SIP palms to see what settings you've got in place for those. Okay, what time are we on? Okay, cool. All right, let's have a look at CICS transaction security. So this is the XTran SIP parameter. Okay, so we've talked about XTran equals yes. This is where if we say XTran equals yes, we then use the IBM supplied RACF classes of TCICS_tran and GCICS_tran as the two class names. Okay, TCICS_tran for member and GCICS_tran for grouping, which I will come on to shortly. If you have XTran equals something, okay, that's saying that you are going to have locally defined, site-defined RACF classes, okay? You'll notice that the SIP parameter is that you've got in is sort of pound, in my example, sorry, this isn't what you have to put in. So my example here is pound, PRD, TRM. And then the classes that would be defined from that would be T pound, PRD, TRN for member, and then G pound, PRD, TRN for the grouping. Okay. The T and the G are forced upon you for those classes. CICS enforces the first character of the RACF class to be the T or the G. So you've got 7 other characters for your own choosing on what you want to do to try and create some logical RACF class names for their purpose. So that's what you can do there. So that's how enabling transaction security. Xtran equals yes, I want transaction security on. Go and essentially ask the questions to these RACF classes. CICS if it's or GCICS if we're using grouping. And then similarly, if it's Xtran equals something that's site defined, okay, that's just the pointer there to the RACF class to go and use to try and find the profile to do the access check on. Okay, so transaction profiles and classes. So you have some choices on what you want to do here. Okay, so we've just seen that Xtran equals yes, or Xtran equals wall of text that you have chosen. So do I want to use the standard IBM classes? Yeah, do I want to use TCICS and GCICS? Okay, they come as a pairing. Do I want to create my own classes? Okay, do I want to have sort of classes for CICS prod, for CICS dev, for CICS test? Yeah. Do I want those profiles prefixed? Okay, so I'll talk about that. So there's a couple of different ways you can do this. Let's say we've got 3 CICS subsystems. Okay, we've got CICS PRD 1, 2, and 3. Okay, we've got Xtran equals yes defined in all of those sits. So what that means is that all of these regions are going to use the IBM default classes of TCICS and GCICS. Okay, I've got sec prefix set to no as well. So essentially, essentially all of these regions are sharing. Okay, so whatever is defined on this RACF profile down here is shared across those CICS prod 1, 2, and 3 regions. Okay, so we're not segregating the access across those regions. Okay, that might be fine, that might be exactly what you want, and that's part of the first thing to do, is to figure out what you want to do, what do you need to achieve. That might be a perfectly fine setup for what you need it to be. Okay, so sharing the default classes amongst the CICS regions with no prefixing will end up with sort of a scenario like that. Okay, the CICS regions all go to the IBM supplied default classes, and then for the access check with the profile that it's looking for. Okay, but there's no way to segregate that access check across CICS PRD 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so if Fred's got access, read access on CEMT here, he's got it here, here, and here. Okay, so that's one kind of scenario you can have. The next scenario is to create locally defined independent classes for each region, or set of related regions. So again, sort of grouping them via like a prod, dev, or a test. So an example being, could I have something defined of, a class for my prod transactions across my prod regions, prod 1, 2, and 3. And then similarly, can I do something for dev? Okay, so split them up, so then have the classes for dev shared between CICS dev 1, CICS dev 2, and CICS dev 3. Okay, the sits for the prods would obviously have xtran points to the PRD TRN, and then for the dev regions, the sit parameters would point to xtran dev TRN. And what that means is that we're having independent classes this time. Okay, so I've got my prod regions are all pointing to T-pound PRD TRN, and my dev regions are pointing to T-pound dev TRN. Okay, and then the profiles at the bottom, so I can segregate what they access that way. Okay, I've still got sec prefix equals no. We'll come on to that in a second. So what that means is that the profile down here is it's CM2. Okay, it's what I'm protecting. Is the resource that I'm protecting in this case is CM2. Okay, so I can have differentiation between the prod and dev regions with that. Okay, so that's an option. Another option that you can have is you might want to share classes that have dissimilar CICS security configurations. Okay, so there's another parameter that you can use, and it's called sec prefix. So sec PRFX in the SIT, and you can either have that as yes or no. No is the default, or you can also specify what that prefix is. And what that means is, so let's say, for example, CMT in prod needs to be locked down, okay? But I want it available in dev. So the prod user ID is prod CICS and the dev is dev CICS. So if I say sec prefix equals yes, what it does is it puts the CICS user ID, it prefixes it in front of the resource to provide the segregation that way. Okay, so I've got this drawn out as well. So what you would have is you've got T-CICS-tran and G-CICS-tran. They're shared between CICS prod 1 and CICS dev 1, but we're providing the differentiation via the prefixing. Okay, so both of them both regions go to the same RACF classes. Okay, the T-CICS-tran and the G-CICS-tran, but the way that we're segregating that access out is via prefixing. Okay, and sec prefix yes. Okay, we'll do that. On the chart before, you can also see that you can have sit parameter prefix. So it doesn't have to be the CICS user ID. You know, you could put something else there. You could just do prod. You could just do dev. Okay, something obviously that's logical for that segregation. So that's another option. Okay, and again, you can also you could do sec prefix. You could do prefixing and locally defined independent classes. Now, I'm not sure I would do that. That seems complex. But it's your choice. Okay, it's very much up to what your installation requires. The point that I would try to make is it's just trying to understand what that is and the impacts that it has, and to make sure that you understand the security that's behind what you've got set up in that SIT. I would go with separate RACF classes and not use prefixing. It's easy now that we've got the RACF CDT class. It's very dynamic to add RACF classes. You know, you don't need to IPL to add RACF classes anymore. It's to add a class into the RACF CD class is essentially just like adding a profile now into a RACF class. It's a class within a class, essentially. But yeah, ultimately it's up to you what you must do best for your organization. Okay, but it's just trying to understand what it is you're trying to achieve and the best way to do it. Okay, a good rule of thumb is to always try and keep things as simple as possible. To not lead to overly engineered solutions, overly complex solutions that are difficult to manage. which is why I think having sort of very well documented RACF classes that are quite logical in their setup, and then not using prefixing. Okay, but again, that I feel like that's a very personal choice. Okay, so I mean, how can you find out what RACF profiles that you do have? Now, unless you've got some really fancy tools like CICS Secure or Vanguard, or you've got something that you've written in house, okay. Yeah, essentially, RACF search command is a fair one to have a list of all of the profiles that you've got in place. So you do a search on TKICS search on GKICS okay, and what this will do is it will just show you the profiles. Okay, obviously, if you've got different classes that you've defined in your sitpalm, you would change those class names there. Okay. And that just shows the profile, literally just the profile name. Okay, then what you want to do is you want to have a look at those profiles, and you need to list each profile and check its UAC, its universal access. Okay, so recommended to be none in 99.999% of cases. So that's a really useful check to see if you've got anything greater than none, because greater than none with CICS transactions means that you can utilize it. So anything that is UAC greater than none means that any user, even if they're not RACF defined, could come in and utilize that CICS transaction. If they've not had any other boundary checks before getting to that point. So you want to find out what your profiles are, and then you want to do some checks on them here. You want to have a look at the UAC. You want to have a look at the access list. So, okay, well, who's got access to it? You might have a UAC of none, but you've got, 5,000 users with access to it that, don't look like they should have. So are you going through an access recertification process on some of your more sensitive transactions, perhaps? Having a look at conditional access lists as well. Conditional access lists are sort of an access list that have like a when clause to them, so you can have access when this is fulfilled. So also good to look at. And then also having a look at the audit settings on them as well. That's also another good thing to look at when you're auditing your profiles, to see, what's the security makeup about it, because security shouldn't just be the access decisions at the front end. It's also, what do we do with the information afterwards? Keeping that forensic data is really important on knowing, well, okay, someone's tried to access this 100 times in the last time frame, and it's been and they've failed, or someone has actually transacted this really sensitive transaction. Should they have? Okay, so being more proactive with your security allows that. Again, I'm putting these up here in case you don't have sort of the tools like CICS Secure and Vanguard or anything written in house, because if you've got those, it's really, they're great tools for that reason. So it's really easy to go and have a look at stuff and make sure the security on the resources within RACF are set up appropriately. Remember, RACF is a resource access based model, so it's the resources that you want to look at. So you'd want to go and have a look at the transaction profiles, the CICS commands, okay, to see what the UX are, the access lists are, the conditional access lists are, the auditing, the logging. If you don't have those tools, it's not a dead end. It's it's just a bit more manual. So as I said, you can do that search command. And then what you can do, you can use that search command with a parameter called CList to create a command list that will then run the RACF commands that you need. So an example here, and I cut this from somewhere else, so it's not a full example, but essentially what you can do is you can do search, okay, and you can do the search command that you want to do. So it's that search within the class of CICS Tran, yeah. And then what you can do is you can write out a C list, and then you wrap around the command that you want to create, and then you've got these two quotes here, and in between these quotes is where the search command will plug in all of the profiles it's found. Okay, so it's creating that command list, and what it will do is it will write that out to a data set, which is your user ID .exec.racf.clist. Okay, so here's an example of it in batch. Okay, so you do your search, your class, CICS Tran, okay, and then you put it to a C list. And what I want to do is I want to do an RL, which is an R list, so list that profile. Okay, and the racf command is RL, the class, the profile, and then if you put all, you'll get all the information. Okay, I'll see everything that I need to do to be able to perform a suitable audit on that profile. So, and then remember that the output of all of the profiles in this class will populate in this space here, and it will just create you a deck of commands. Okay, so you could end up with 400 racf commands that list CICS Tran profiles. Okay, and then the second part of this batch job is you execute that to get the output. Right, so again, that's if you don't have any of these really fancy tools, these good ESM front ends to enable you to do that. That's a good, that's a good idea. And then you can have some recs that goes through and pulls out, UACs, access lists, lots of different things. Okay, there's a lot of ways to get this information. Obviously, some are more difficult. Obviously, if you've got Z Secure, if you've got Vanguard, if you've got something written in-house, it makes life a lot easier. But there's still ways to do that stuff. Okay, to have a look at those profiles. Okay, IBM supplied many transactions as part of the CICS install, and they are categorized and all have different security requirements, and they're categorized into Cat 1, Cat 2, and Cat 3. So Cat 1, internal use only. They are transactions CICS uses internally to do its stuff. It's never associated with the terminal. And the racf ESM is not called for these transactions. Okay. Apparently, I've not personally seen this, but some people define them to racf for documentation purposes. I've not seen that, but racf is not called for these transactions. Okay. The ones that we're most interested in from a racf perspective is category 2. These are the ones that we're really interested in. The category 2 ones are the CICS administration transactions. They're extremely powerful. You need to protect these with unique, fully qualified racf profiles, possibly. You must certainly have a UAC of none on them, and they should have a very restricted access control list. Okay, there's no need for these transactions to have UACs greater than none on there. Not every user within your systems, especially the ones that come in and aren't racf defined, won't need to run these transactions. So it's not appropriate to have UAC other than of none on those. Again, could be a good candidate for audit or read. Again, that's something you need to go and take away and think about. The impacts there. Again, security is a balancing act between confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Okay. Obviously, all these audit records get cut. They go somewhere. They have an overhead. They have storage attached to them. So that'll have impact on your SMF data sets. So again, could be a good candidate for audit or read. Something to think about, something to impact assess. Okay. Cat 3, everyone needs access to these. Again, exempt from security checks. These are things like sign-on transaction and some of the good morning stuff. Again, I've not seen this, but apparently some people define them to RecF for documentation purposes. I'm not sure I'd overly recommend that. I don't think that RecF should be used as a documentation source. But again, it's whatever that you want to implement, I suppose, for that one. Okay, so that's the 3. Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3. Be very mindful of Cat 2. You know, this is all documented stuff. Okay, you'll be able to find the Cat 2 transactions. You will be able to rationalize them into your system and where they are, and then you would be able to perform an audit on these. Okay, if you know what they are, you could just put them into a C list and do R lists on them. Okay, if you've got the good fancy tools, you can have a look at them, you know, very, you know, online dynamically. There's you know, there's good reporting language as well now with some of these security tools with Z-Secure's Carla. I hear Vanguard have, you know, they have the reporting language now. I think it's called Marla. You know, that enables you to be able to write to get under the cover of the front end and be able to write things so you can be a bit more flexible in your reporting. So you could have like a Cat 2 report that, you know, you just run iteratively to review it. Any change to it, it sends off an alert. Some, you know, some really cool stuff that you could do around that. One of the first steps is just planning it, identifying it, and then starting off that baseline. So Cat 2 ones would be a really good starting place for that. Am I doing on time? Okay, not great. Right, member and grouping classes. So when we were looking at the RACF classes that we could define, there was the CICS tran, there was the GCICS tran, and I mentioned the words member and grouping classes. Okay, so we'll have a look at that now. So, and it's a pair of classes. They come in pairs, and it's the member class and the grouping class. Okay, the RACF classes, they come in a pair. And CICS is probably the biggest user of this. So here's a table here which sort of shows you the member class, the grouping class equivalent, and then a description of what they are. And those first characters are fixed. So just like it was with, so as I said, so TKICS tran and GKICS tran, the T and the GR, they are fixed. Okay, after that, you've got the 7 characters if you want to define your own for those uses. Okay, for the purpose of this presentation, we'll just focus on TKICS tran and GKICS tran. Okay, that's the transaction security that we've been talking about. But you can see there's some other classes here that are interested in the likes of the CICS files, the programs, the commands that can be protected, etc., etc. Okay. But again, I think the biggest user probably of, if anyone's using grouping classes, would be CICS transactions. Okay, so as I said, CICS and RACF are big users, possibly the biggest users of member and grouping classes. Okay, essentially it's 2 different ways to protect resources in CICS. Okay, you can do it at the member level, that single entity level, or you can do it at a grouping class level. We'll talk about how CICS uses them, a profile merge, and the in-storage profiles. Okay, so let's have a look at, and then we'll look at how you can determine who has access. So what we've got here, what we've got here is an example of member class profiles. Okay, so you can see it's the TKICS tran. So let's just say you want to protect 3 CICS transactions. Okay, you want INVC, ORDP, STOH. Okay, and you want to give a RACF group called warehouse users access to those transactions. Okay, you could come along and you can do an R-define for CICS tran, INVC, ORDP, STOH. Okay, and then you permit the warehouse users the access to those transactions individually. Okay, so really simple. This is the transaction I'm protecting. It's defined. This is who's got access to it. Okay, so that's member class profiles. Did you notice it's the CICS tran, and it's that's that kind of single entity. Okay, simple. Okay, member class profiles. However, some people choose not to do that. Some people choose to group their transactions. Okay, and that's when you get grouping class profiles. So you define in the CICS tran a profile of your whatever you want to call it. Okay, here we've called it where_trans. Okay, and basically you define in the profile you use the ralter admin command to add the free transactions. Sorry, the ralter add mem command. So you add member information into the where_trans profile in CICS tran. Okay, so you add the same profiles, INVC, ORDP, STOH. Okay, so all we've done here is we've defined one profile. We've defined one grouping profile. Okay, then we've done an ralter to add those transactions into that group. Okay, so then when we permit the warehouse users, okay, to this where_trans grouping class, essentially what you're saying is if an ID has access to this transaction here, okay, to this, if they have access to this profile, then by association, they've got access to these 3 transactions within the group. Okay, so essentially we've turned the 6 commands we did in the previous slide into these 3 commands. Okay, so again, really, very useful setup perhaps if that's how you want to do. The problem seems to occur, and the fun comes when there's a mixture of grouping and member class profiles. Okay, if someone defines something in here, so might have defined INVC in here and then also put INVC in the where trans one, in the grouping class one. So when CICS starts and asks RACF to load into storage the process of rack listing the class CICS tran, RACF detects that it's got this grouping pair, okay, the CICS tran. Okay, the opposite CICS tran, TCICS tran. Okay, so it loads them all up into storage, but it detects because I've got INVC in here in CICS tran, and I've got INVC in TCICS tran, so in the member and the grouping, it has to merge, and that's probably where people get a bit confused on what access they're getting, what access they may be blocking out. Are they over provisioning access as well, possibly, because this merge can happen. So it merges them. And it only merges them if that resource name, in this instance, transaction appears in more than one place. Okay, so in that CICS tran and that TCICS tran. This, as I said, it only applies if it's in more than one of those profiles. Okay. The UAC of the merge profile uses the most restrictive access. Okay, so if you've got a TCICS tran, okay, and the UAC is read, but then the opposite to that, the GCICS tran, right, has a UAC of none, then the merged profile that's created within storage will have a UAC of none. Okay, that may block some people getting access who used to get it from the TCICS tran, or if the intention was that they would get it from that CICS tran UAC of read. If people were getting it via that UAC of read in the CICS tran, and then we add something into the GCICS tran of the same with a more restrictive UAC, okay, when those profiles are merged within storage, you could essentially block out access and cause could cause some problems. Okay. The access list, okay, again, similar. If a user or a group appears in multiple profiles, the user or group is given, in this case, the highest level of access. So if you've got a user on an access list with none, okay, in the where trans GCICS tran in the grouping, and a user on the access list of INVC in the TCICS tran, then the user's going to get read. Okay, so again, that might not be what you want. You might just not be aware of what's going on under those covers and not figuring out how this access is being either blocked or gained. Okay, so you might think that you're blocking them. Okay, with adding those groupings, that's not the case, because RACF is going to merge them together if those two profiles appear in those two different entities. Okay, so again, something to be very mindful of. I'm a big fan of just sticking with member class. I feel like I know where I am with them. Okay, be that TCICS tran or be that a locally defined one. Okay, it applies to this one member. It points to this one resource. I understand where I'm at. I can see the access list. I don't need to review any further if there's any grouping, and I'm not at a loss of confusion on if there's something happening within profile merging. Okay, so I think my recommendation here would be, if you want to use them, but I would, use one or the other. But again, it depends. It might not be that simple for you. What I would definitely suggest is that if you are defining anything new and if you're in a hybrid kind of environment with that, would be to make sure that you're reviewing the impacts of it. So does that exist somewhere else? Do I need to be mindful of access? Do I need to be mindful of UACs? Okay. Is that going to have an impact on X amount of users gaining access, having access blocked? Okay. Right, some other bits. So the majority of things that are that are happening, it's transaction security and sign-on security. All the other stuff is very dependent on what's going on in that CICS region. But there's a sign-on transaction. Okay, you can use the IBM supplied one, CESN, or you may customize your own to add some extra fields in, etc. Just a little nod. CICS does support MFA. Just saying, it's useful. Okay, so MFA is a really good thing. It's something that within the security space we could talk on for a very long time on the benefits of it. It might be worth something to take away and have a look at. Okay. This is something that we mentioned earlier. Okay, remember you can protect who can log on to a particular CICS application. So if you're remembering the SIT, you've got that Apple ID equals, whatever that's set to, you can actually protect in the RACF Apple class. You should protect in the RACF Apple class. And you can define, so let's say you've got in your SIT Apple ID equals prod CICS. Okay, in the RACF APPL class, then you could have a profile called prod CICS, and then you could make sure that's protected, in the appropriate manner with UAC of none, build an appropriate access list for who needs access to that, to be able to log on to that CICS region, etc., etc. Okay, so that's a good way of protecting what users can even log into that CICS system before we even get into transaction security. Okay, so building up those boundaries of security. Okay. There's another setting, kind of security related, that's worth a mention. And it's around sort of that sign-on scope. Most what am I saying here? So most people run sign-on scope equals none from what we've seen when doing reviews on CICS. Okay. What you can have is you can have different setups here. And what it means is that there's no restriction. Okay, you can have 4 screens or 4 32, 70 sessions all logged into that same screen. Okay, now that might be exactly what you need. Possibly for that business, you might need to have people looking at different things all at real time, all at the same time. Okay, but it's just something to review. You can set SNN scope to CICS, so you can only sign on to one CICS region at once. Like TSO. But you can also say you only sign on to one TCICS for the entire MVS LPAR and a Sysplex. Again, it really depends on what your security requirements are here. I think SN scope equals CICS is a good one, you know. However, it might not work for your business. It's just a sit palm to have a review of, have a look at, and make sure you understand that that is what you wanted and that is what you're getting. Okay. It only affects user logons via the CESN and does not affect the preset terminal logons. Auditing CICS. I think this is my last slide, which is good because stealthily running out of time. So auditing CICS, again, we've tried to signpost you to different things here to look at throughout this session if you want to go and have a look at your CICS configuration. Okay. CICS obviously has its own SMF. Okay, so you can have a look at those. There's IBM health checkers, okay, that you can review. You can review the CICS job logs. For any security messages in there, doing fines for ICH 408I messages, seeing what SIT palms are actually pulled in. You can review commands that have been issued, and then actually auditing the RACF side of the CICS resources that we've mentioned. So finding out what profiles are in use. Okay, first port would be, is security turned on? Are we talking to the ESM? Next would be what RACF classes have we got defined in our SIT. Okay, so then you can go there and have a look. So, okay, so now I know I'm going to these RACF classes. Where do I go next? Then you look at the profiles. Okay, now I've got a list of the profiles. Now I have a look at, okay, let's have a look at the Cat2 transactions. Okay, of those, look at the profiles that protect those Cat2 transactions. List them, see what they're made up of, see what the access control lists are, see what the UACs are, see what the audit settings are. Okay. And then from there, hopefully you'd have a pretty good picture of what CICS security you're doing. Okay. Awesome. Right, that's all I had. I have approximately about 6 minutes before I need to run off. So if there's any comments, any questions, let me know. My email is literally just Leanne Wilson at Vertali.com. So if anyone wants to email me with any questions, you're more than welcome to. I'm not sure I can see the chat or anything, so Amanda, do you just normally just let people shout out, or do you just read questions?
I can review the chat if anyone's got any questions y'all want to drop in. There are a couple I will touch on, and let's see. Someone, Alan asked, are there any security issues with PLT programs, PLTPI for initialization and PLTSD for shutdown?
Again, I think that's something that you'd need to review and have a look and see what's turned on or turned off within your SIP parameters around that, to be honest.
Okay. Someone wants to learn about RACF segments for application that uses internal security. It's a little more detailed. I can keep going. It says, I want to learn about RECF segments for an application that uses internal security that relied on a function of NEX exit. The exit and the associated DFH and other programs were removed at CICS version 6.1.
Okay, so yeah, so RACF segments are used to house a whole different heap of application dependent information that you can put onto your RACF base profile. What you'd want to do is find out what segment that is. I would imagine it's the CICS segment, so you can have a look at the CICS profiles and then you list them and then you can say CICS at the end. If it's something that they've done in-house, they might have used CS data, perhaps. It depends how long ago this has all been defined. But if you reviewed on how to list out the CICS segment information on whatever profile entity it is it a user, is it a group, is it a resource? That's what you'd need to do to see what was set up there.
Okay. Someone would, and this is probably not something you can answer right away, but they want to know where they can read more about MFA for CICS, or is this a standard RACF MFA?
So first I would check the sort of the RACF CICS. There's the RACF CICS security implementation guide. I mean, you know, if you're just going to Google and put RACF CICS manual, that'll come up. I can't remember what the exact title is. I think there might be a bit of a documentation shift though, that they're porting it all. I'd have to check. But yeah, if you just had a look at the CICS security guide, that would be the first pointer to have a look at.
Okay. Ben asks, how prevalent are profiles or roles and member lists or resource groups for reducing complexity?
You say that one again, Amanda. Sorry.
How prevalent are profiles or roles and member lists or resource groups for reducing complexity?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about sort of having access to resources via roles, that's definitely the way to go. You have to get yourself into sort of a role-based access situation where you're saying, okay, so this is this group of people, their job function should be able to do this and this, and that's how they then get that access. Because then what you're doing is you're providing access to those resources at that grouping level. So let's say I've got 5 CICS systems programmers and they all need access to, you know, X amount of transactions. I just have to permit that group. Whereas if you do it at the individual basis, that's a lot of admin. You have to do it per user. And then what you end up with is really big access control lists, no logic to it. It increases complexity. When people leave, it can also be an administrative nightmare if people move. Whereas if you take the time to sort of, and I don't say this lightly, it's a really big undertaking to move to if you're not in it. From going to a role-based access control environment with data classification as well, so an understanding of what the data that you're interrogating is doing. When you're in that kind of position, the complexity of managing your ESM and the security profiles becomes much simpler, because then you get into an essence of, okay, this is, you do it based on what do I need access to, and then you go through recertification processes on that to make sure that everyone who's got that access is valid for their job function. So access isn't creeping, etc.
Okay. I don't see any other questions at this time. I do see many accolades, so I wish you had access to the chat. But great presentation. So thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your contact information so people could reach out if they have any other questions.
Yeah, that's no problem. No, I appreciate people joining. As I said, that was my first time with that presentation, so it was good to use it. It's always very difficult doing them virtually, I find. I never know where to look. My camera's here, my slides are here, my notes are there. So I don't know if I just look at the ceiling, but yeah, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. And yeah, if there's any feedback, as long as it's constructive and not aggressive, it's always welcomed.
Well, I know there's interest in getting the deck if that's something you can share, and we will
Yeah.
share with all our participants. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm in the UK and I'm literally running off as soon as this call finishes because I've got an appointment. But I'll get them over to you tomorrow, Amanda.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool.
Yeah, so just to wrap up today, I want to give you all some articles and news. The last CICS session recap is posted online, so you can check that out. I dropped these links in chat, so you don't need to QR code them. We do have CICS and security related jobs that were posted recently from partners. So there's a CICS system programmer opening and a RACF security engineer opening just posted on our job board. And we're always looking for contributors for Planet Mainframe. So if you're interested in writing, if you're interested in presenting a future session that you think your colleagues in this CICS group would get value from, let me know. I want to thank our partners, Broadcom and Data Kinetics, for again, for their partnership. And if you're looking to connect with other members of the community, we're in a lot of places, but I will just point you in the direction of LinkedIn being our most popular channel for conversations related to the user group. And with that, if there's no other questions, which I don't think there are, I want to wish y'all a great rest of the day.
Brilliant.
All right, have a good one.
Amanda, thank you.
Bye-bye.